Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. I know keep eating your lunch, please. I'm really just here for your lunchtime entertainment. It's a little bit, they asked me to do a keynote talk today and gave me the lunchtime spot. So it's going to be a little bit of a dialogue from my side, but happy to take questions anytime to keep it rolling. But, it's an honor to be here. Why did they ask me to do this? I figured, maybe 30 years of experience might have a little bit of, some tips and tricks to share with you today. So this is a little bit of my timeline, I guess. You can see my formative years marked by the tiger paw. That's where I learned, I wanted to be an engineer and, really got the background to what my career was going to look like. I had a variety of different opportunities. Got to be able to be an engineer, lead engineers. I got to be involved in the commercial side of the business, strategic part of the business. And now I'm actually leading a business. So it's one of those things where, over time, you learn a few morsels along the way. And so it's really a pleasure to sit down and talk about it today and really kind of show you a little bit about what a career in medical devices might look like. So this is 30 years of what I have worked on. So it could be anywhere from cardiology. I worked on a puncture closure device just out of grad school. Worked on being able to sit down and with a very small company, I was one of 3 engineers. And we sat down and developed a device that would actually close femoral punctures after cardiac interventions. So something, 30 years ago, there were sandbags being put on groins to stop the bleeding, or somebody my size or bigger than me standing over top of the patient with their heel of their hand, in your groin, trying to stop the bleeding from the intervention. So devices like these were unusual back then. After a few years, I got into orthopedics. And that is something that, I wanted to do coming out of grad school. That was my, I guess what I studied. I studied cartilage in grad school. And I went, interviewed at Synthes, and they told me they don't take kids right out of school, go get some experience, come back. And so that's what I did. But little did I know that the startup that I worked with was only about 9 miles away from Synthes. So it kind of helped me catapult into that side of the business. But went from a small startup company, we had 2 SKUs, so 2 products that we sold, into Synthes where we had a catalog of over 40,000. So it was something that, you start thinking about, you're like, you catch your breath a little bit, but it really is. I don't think the laser pointer's working here, but you have the breadth of all things orthopedic trauma that you have to learn. You have to be able to teach. You have to be able to develop new solutions for. But in reality, you're solving problems in 206 bones of the body. So this one here, the trochanteric nail, was one of my first patents. It's something now is used in over 300,000 patients a year. So made a little progress over 25 years, I guess. But, something that you can think about growing, think about developing, and really just understand, what you can do as an engineer. So after about 20 years in hardware, they asked me to go into robotics. So I went from, dealing in everything, bones and metal and plastics, to electrons and screens and software. And that was a big change. But, did the purpose change? We're still trying to improve orthopedic outcomes. We're still trying to understand what we can do to improve device utilization. We developed the first onboard patient robot. You can see right there, it's a basically an Elizarov frame that's actually robotically controlled. So all the struts are adjusted automatically based on the algorithm for the osteotomy reduction. So then we had the knee robot, and they just now introduced the spine robot. But, one of those things, it was like, I had something, changing inside. I was like, do I really want to work at a big company anymore? I mean, I was the second engineer here. I was one of 300 people in product development here by the time it changed. We just started a robotics team. That was something that was not organically developed. It was more of an acquisition, and then you come in to develop it. So it was something that was time for a change. And so I changed again and went to another device company that looks extremely different than the previous three. Another startup, but we're dealing with infection prevention. So we're using surgical washes, wound gels, different ways to actually fight infection and break down biofilms that cause infection. So when you think about medical devices, the breadth in your career could be vast. Big company, small company, dealing with surgical wash all the way to robotics and everything in between. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So that's a little bit, I'm thinking about, what am I going to talk about and why am I here? Well, it's probably because you want to hear some kind of intelligent secret to success. I'll do my best, but I'll tell you right now, it's going to be limited to medical devices. I don't have any other success stories to really share that are going to be any relevance today. But I do like to keep things simple. So there's 4 basic principles that I follow. And IV is Roman numeral 4, so you can, ever how you want to remember them, that's how you can remember them, but they're 4 principles. So in medical devices, there are 4 things, whether you're a company, a career, a person, you need to focus on. And if you can get success in these 4 things, you're going to have a successful company, a successful career, successful device. First, design it. Very simple, R&D. Get your design right, and we'll talk about that. Next, you got to make it. How are you going to make it? It has to be high quality. It has to be made. Are you going to make one, or are you going to make 1,000,000? So design it and make it. Then you got to sell it. So it's got to be sold, with quite a, how are you going to sell it? In the OR, online, what's your channel? And then finally, that's probably not so easy to relate to is teach it. And I'll talk to you about that. So these are the 4 key things that I've always kind of tried to focus on. Design it, make it, sell it, teach it. So keep it simple. So if you're my age, you know exactly whose logo that is. But, it's one of those things where if I can keep it simple, it's very relative to have a conversation like this, but it's also very easy to understand and focus on as you develop through your career. So design it. Start with the problem to solve. Don't come to, we heard a couple of things from the panels, don't sit down and have a really great invention, but don't know what you're solving for. If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's not the way to get a good design. So start with the problem to solve, not the solution. And make sure that it's a medical problem, clinical problem. This is something that people don't think about. Be your own biggest critic. Think about all the questions that you want to ask that need to be answered about your device. That's just something that, because you're going to get asked them in the future. So think about, continually ask all the questions of yourself. Be your own biggest critic. No one, absolutely no one, is going to love your idea as much as you do. You will absolutely think your idea is the best solution that you will come up with, and it's going to solve all the problems, but nobody is going to see it through the same lens that you do. So think about that as you continue to go through the development process. The enemy of good is perfect. What's good enough? We talked about MVP earlier today. You know, as an entrepreneur, as you start up, think about what is good enough to actually make sure you can solve the problem that you identified early on. And I always sit down and fell back on, does it improve patient outcomes in the hands of the average surgeon? Now, I think we all know what averages mean. There are some that are below average and some that are above average. Definitely people graduated medical school below average. So, but you have to cater to what is the average surgeon and are we improving outcomes when we put our devices in their hands? So observe and document. I think Manning talked about that earlier in some of his instances. Make sure, put yourself in the shoes of the user, but make sure the user is not one. It's a myriad of things, experts, novices, different generations, even the support staff that are going to be developing or using this device and help you in surgery. Can the device be sold? What's the channel? What's the market size? Are we developing for a patient size of 15 or a patient size of 15 million? What are the ways to characterize that market? And then we talked about building your IP platform and build your supporting evidence plan. So if you feel like you sit down and I maybe left a few people out of design it, make it, sell it, teach it, you might have a career pathway in, we talked about regulatory. We talked about HR. We talked about compliance. This is where you sit down and say, as a company, I can develop a competitive advantage if I have outstanding talent in these areas. Regulatory affairs. They will help you find the right regulatory strategy. If you have the right design quality talent, they will help you define how to test your device so you actually meet all of the expectations of your users. If you have excellent help in human resources, and you're going to hear this theme a lot, that it's all talent oriented, bringing the best talent in to help you develop these solutions. So while you're focused on design, and that is an absolute mandate that everything should be focused on these 4 items, you can have competitive advantages if you focus on some of these other areas and hone in on really being differentiated by them. Think about make it. Early engagement, we've talked about already today, being engaged early, not only with regulatory, but with your manufacturing people. Are you going to contract out or are you doing it yourself? How are you actually sitting down from your design of experiments and design for manufacturing? How are you actually putting that strategy together? I was designing some implants early in my career, and one of the prototype workers came back and asked me what material I was using to design this product. And I told him it was stainless steel. He goes, well, we would need impossibilium. I was like, well, why do you need that? He goes, because it can't be made. He goes, there's no tool path that I can put on a CNC machine to make this product. Now, your design tool's in 3D. You can design anything you want in 3D, but I can't make it on a CNC because I don't have that tool path. Now, today you can 3D print it, but you have to put all of that into consideration. Raw materials, do not compromise. This is something where, if you're going to use stainless steel, use medical grade, high quality stainless steel. Challenge your manufacturing team to always use the highest grade and highest potential raw materials. Because if you start with garbage, you end up with garbage. And you have to understand what you start with really impacts how your final product comes out. So be a stickler when it comes to looking at your raw materials. I talked about COGS. Understand if you're making 1 or 1 million, that's just, are you going to stamp it, mold it, machine it? There's all kinds of different ways to look at that. Sterile versus non-sterile. This is a big decision and could add cost to the overall program. And the only reason I say that is think about how you're going to deliver your device to the end user. Is it in a sterilized package? Is it sterilized in trays? Do you have to actually do class 100,000 clean room processing? All of this adds up to what are the costs that go into shelf life studies? What are the costs that go into packaging? What are the costs that go into production? and sterilization down the road to actually have a sterile device? Or can you do just as good having the hospital sterilize it in an autoclave and actually repeat use it? Distribution or logistics also fall under make it. I just recently ran into a situation where our products are going through an equatorial crossing. Has anybody thought about that yet? Ever? Because now you're now having a product that goes from the south side of the equator to the north side of the equator. And there's a temperature differentiation that's quite significant. So we have to do equatorial crossing packaging testing to make sure our devices don't actually come out of substrate and separate. Something very different than shipping a stainless steel screw around the world. So just things that are different. On-site installation. You know, if you're going to have a robot that's actually installed on site, serviced on site, maintained on site, it's a very different relationship than delivering products into surgery. So when you make it, you know, these are some of the things you need to focus on. Your competitive advantage here is going to be your IT systems, your quality control systems to make sure that, you know, you can have a high quality product. You don't design quality in, you actually have quality as a product. And then your human resources, getting the right talent. Sell it. Surgeon relationships in this case are built in the operating room. This is something that I learned is a privilege and an honor for this industry. Most sales are actually done in a purchasing office or a materials manager office. This sale is actually done in the trenches, in the operating rooms, on the weekends, at midnight, and we are allowed to be in that operating room. It's a very high privilege that not a lot of other industries get. The patient is extremely vulnerable. It is an extremely high stress situation. The surgeon likely is going to throw something at you if something goes wrong. And so you have to have good reflexes to be able to get out of the way. But it's just the way it is. Do not take this for granted. If you're invited into an operating room, into a patient space, it is a privilege. So that is something that you have to remember and have to respect. So that brings a different type of selling. We're not trying to sell a pen or a widget. You're actually doing consultative selling. You're actually looking at clinical knowledge, knowing not only what your product is, but what the problem is you're trying to solve. Disease states, clinical issues, complications, everything that can arise from being in that operating room, you have to be able to address and deal with and manage. You have to have your product knowledge inside and out, but not just your product, all the competitive products, because that's something that you're constantly going to be challenged on. Why should I use yours instead of somebody else's? So have a plan A, plan B, plan C, and then think of contingencies. So when you walk into an operating room, you have your multiple plans, you have x-rays around you, or you're walking to a cath lab, you have all these screens that are active, and you're seeing images. You haven't opened the patient at all yet. So once you open the patient, things change. So when you make that first incision, when you make that first puncture, you actually discover how accurate all your imaging and work is actually reflective of the patient's ordeal. And that all changes in an instant. I can actually tell you that I've received phone calls from a surgeon in the operating room, and I've talked them through a procedure over the phone because they didn't have the right devices that they needed, and they had to essentially take what they had and build something out of it to actually help this certain patient. So that's why you have to have the product knowledge, the disease state knowledge, and the ability to think on your feet through all of those types of scenarios. Depending on the product or company, selling is 24/7, 365. You are on call. Your patients are being treated at all hours of the day and week and night. And when I was interviewing for our sales team, I would actually interview their significant others and ask them if they're ready to commit to this lifestyle. Because are you going to be willing to let your significant other leave a birthday party of your child? Are you going to be willing for your significant other to actually walk up and leave Christmas Eve dinner? These are the things that we ask the sales team to do that are covering these types of devices. So it is a true commitment and a true understanding of the disease state that you deal with. So you need to know the clinical and economic buyer. This isn't something that you focus on the surgeon and it's a laser focus on the surgeon, whoever's writing the prescription. You are actually going to be the best friends with the support staff. If you make the day of the support staff go easy in a very difficult situation, they are going to call you the next time. So if you sit down and think about, if I can make this difficult case go easy and I'm only going to make $15 today, they're not going to need to call me for the easy cases that happen all the time that are almost kind of repetitive. So it's a commitment, but it's also understanding who your customer is, not from a tunnel point of view, but from a very broad point of view. So if you do the right things in sales in this space, good things are going to happen. So here's where your competitive advantages come in. And I'll say training above all. If you have a well-trained, well-educated, well-versed sales force, you will stand out. You will stand out significantly from your competitors because you will understand and be a true service or a true consultant to the surgeon in their time of need. Compliance. Whoever thought compliance would be a competitive advantage? But I can tell you, having a compliance person that says no all the time versus a compliance person that says, well, let's figure that out and we'll get it done, is a different ball game altogether. So having a compliance person that is willing to work with you to solve problems in this space versus always putting up the hand and saying, no, we can't do it because that's what the regulations say. There are ways compliantly to do business and do business very well. So having that in your corner is a huge benefit. And then human resources, obviously, finding the right people to do this job is by and far saving you tons of money down the line because you invest so much in the front side to find the right salespeople and get them trained and build those relationships and make sure that they're well-versed and in their territory and in their field. And if they don't work out because they don't have the right personality or right behaviors, you have to start that all over again. So human resources is a huge advantage. So finally, teach it. This is the one that probably isn't obvious. But if you sit down and you think about it, in service is like practice, practice, practice. So I adopted some Davoisms here where best is the standard. If you sit down and you can think about you're going to practice every day and you're teaching not only the nurses and the surgeons, but you're putting them in a situation where they continue to have repetitions with your devices. They continue to have scenarios with your devices. They are going to continue to be able to teach other people while you're not there. Or you sit down and think about it, I'm going to teach the residents. And the residents are going to continue to evolve and go through their residency. And they're going to learn on my devices. And when they go away to their new attending level, they're going to be taught on my devices. And they're going to want to use them when they're in practice because that's what they're used to. So there's in-service is like practice. So best is the standard. So if you want them to be the best at using your products, then you have to go in and prepare like everything is game time with patients on the table. Resident imprinting, starting early in career. forms their practice for years to come. We talked about that. Lifelong learning culture leads to continuous improvement. And this is always about being challenged about what you do, being challenged about, is there a better way to do this, and being very observant. So as an engineer, you should be naturally curious. But as somebody that's observing surgery every day, whether you're an engineer developing a new product, whether you're in sales, whether you're in distribution or logistics, this is where you actually find continuous improvement to make things better. So teaching it is also being in a learning environment to improve. Teaching is also a passion of your customers. Surgeons are lifelong learners. They want to continue to improve. They want to be using the latest and greatest devices. So if you sit down and think about how you develop your key opinion leaders, we talked about it early in the Invent panel. Who are the panel member, or who are your key opinion leaders that you put on your advisory boards? That's where you start to find out, these are the ones that are going to help me develop next generation devices. So always be humble enough to listen and learn and self-monitor. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're not going to learn anything. So you have to be humble enough, have some humility, and learn and listen, whether it's the charge nurse that's telling you your packaging isn't the right color. You know, and that's a real scenario. They told me one time they didn't like the packaging because their color was wrong and they couldn't see it on the shelf to pull out the right sizes. So when you sit down and you make some simple change like that, relatively simple change, and you can actually make your devices recognizable on the shelf, then you have advocates on the staff side, and they want to go pull these things off the shelf versus having to go search, you know, all over the creation to find your products. So listen and learn and be self-monitoring in how that happens. Competitive advantage. I got to go back to R&D on this one. R&D and your engineers will be a huge competitive advantage to helping teach your products all across the world. You know, regardless of who you are or what company you work for, as an engineer, surgeons are going to want to talk to you because they're going to have an idea, an improvement. They're a frustrated engineer. They couldn't hack engineering, so they went to medical school, you know, for all kinds of reasons. But they will talk to engineers because they want to see improvements in how they treat their patients. So R&D is a huge competitive edge when you're actually trying to teach your products. And then obviously I bring up human resources again, because I think that's finding the right people is still key to that. So those are the 4 principles. Design it, make it, sell it, teach it. Really simple. You have some competitive advantages in there, but it's also a very simple way to construct how you want to go about your career, your business, building your company. But how do you make it work? So first of all, find your why. Why do I want to be here? Why do I want to do this? We talked about everybody's in healthcare because you want to improve patient health. You want to see people get better. You know, you might have a specific reason, a family member, a way or something that's kind of lit the fire underneath you, but you have to find your why, because you're going to run into enough obstacles that if you don't have a why, then you're going to give up. And you don't want that propensity to sit down and always say that I can't, when you know that you can if you have a why. So, you know, you look at, I like this quote, do as much as possible for the patient, do as little as possible to the patient. So if you think about how do you make that happen? Why can you make such a difference that you can improve patients' lives by doing the minimal amount to disrupt what they've done? So I was 25 years in trauma. So, you know, it's the old joke, you know, the surgeon or the patient went to the surgeon after breaking their fingers and said, "Doctor, well, I'll be able to play piano after you fix this." And the doctor's like, "Absolutely, for sure." And he's like, "Great, I've never been able to play piano before in my life." You know, but it's like, there are immediate things that can happen Like my hip fracture device, people are walking again. It's very simple to see patient improvements and patients and your why to actually get there. But do as little as possible so that they understand that they're getting the maximum amount of effort. Purpose or passion. Professor Clements or Dr. Clements actually talked about passion. I add that you need purpose. If you have passion and purpose, it's one of the things that will get you over a lot of those humps to help you realize your why. I had both throughout my career, but I would actually say I had some waning passion when it came to robotics. It was like they asked me to go from implants and instruments to robotics. And I was like, who doesn't want to go work in robotics? This is the next greatest technology. Everybody's doing it. It's the coolest thing right now in orthopedics. And I got to start working on it. And I was like, we're automating 7 cuts. I don't want to diminish anybody that's on the line or anybody that's working on robotics. But in reality, you're guiding a saw blade to make 7 cuts in a total knee. When before I was working on solving, numerous solutions on 206 bones in the body where no fracture was alike. Here I've been trying to build a machine that makes 7 cuts. Wasn't exactly as passionate about that. And so you sit down and you can see through your career where you're going to have peaks and valleys. You're going to have to make some decisions. My purpose was still there. I absolutely wanted to help patients. My passion for what I was doing to actually make that happen, not so much. Not as what it was the first 25 years. So I had to get that balance back. So some leadership lessons. Respect the platinum rule. Who knows what the golden rule is? Everybody? Anybody ever heard of the platinum rule? No? All right. So the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated yourself, right? Well, I don't know that you're going to necessarily like the way other people treat me. So the platinum rule is treat others as they would like to be treated themselves. Understand who you're talking to, who your team is, and what their reward system is, how they like to be recognized, how they like to be motivated. So respect that and understand that they have if you're going to treat them the way you like to be treated, they may not respond very well. So know what you're asking of your employees, and don't ever ask anybody to do something you wouldn't do yourself or you haven't done yourself. That's just something, in my mind, is just a very disrespectful ask. Establish your company culture. I've always said culture is what happens when management isn't in the room. If you want people to think a certain way or make decisions a certain way, empower them to make those decisions, but involve them or expose them to a culture that will help them make the decisions that you want them to make, and that's in the right vein of the company. So culture is a huge part of leadership, but culture is not always top down. You really have to work on it extremely hard. And I think everybody heard, culture eats strategy for breakfast or whatever. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and every midnight snack that you could think of. Culture is paramount to driving a successful business. Empowerment. Not everybody likes to be told what to do. So if you are, entrepreneur and you're starting your own business and you want to build the right team, that you're going to need some help, hire the right people, but empower them to make the right decisions. Don't sit down and hire the people so you can tell them what to do and then send them off on their way. Hire them to join you in the journey. Hire them to be part of the experience of this new great company you're building. Don't hire them to be the directed ones to just do your job and do your dirty work. So set high standards and put decision-making at the right level. Transparency and communication. This is when you think you've communicated and you've gotten the message as clear as possible, do it again. And then once you think you've done it a second time, do it again. Because I can tell you, people do not hear things the first time, second time, third time, eighth time. It takes consistent communication with the right messaging and the right support to actually get where you need to go communicated and everybody on the same page. That goes especially for the sales force. So because the sales force are essentially entrepreneurs in the field doing their thing on a daily basis. The last thing they want to do is read 10 emails a day from corporate. So if you think you're communicating through email, that's not happening. If you think you're communicating through a town hall and a one-time call every 3 months, that's not happening either. You have to actually work on your communication on a regular basis. So once again, as a leader, humility plays a role. Listen and learn, but listen to your team. They're going to tell you what's wrong. This is the Boeing example. This is the space shuttle example. There are so many examples in the literature that shows if you don't listen to your team, you will make wrong decisions. So as a leader, always be open, always be, communicating, have an open door policy so people are free to walk into your office. So, and like I said earlier, if you're the smartest person in the room, your decision-making is flawed because it's not being challenged. So just think about that. So I always try to sit down and we talked about what books we've read recently. Here's a few things that are on my shelf and have recently read. But, today we talked about, purpose, culture, passion, work ethic, organization. These are all things that from an entrepreneurial standpoint, they will actually make a difference to you. They will help you kind of guide your path. I don't think they're skewed one way or the other. I think it's good advice. I don't necessarily agree with Bill George's politics, but I agree with how he is as a leader. I think he's done very good at the True North, and what he did at Medtronic, I think is absolutely fantastic. I think this book about from James Kerr on the New Zealand All Blacks, phenomenal. Boys in the Boat, work ethic. Kobe Bryant just never stopped asking questions, never stopped. I think it was Michael Jordan used to say Kobe called him every day. And then organization. This is probably the one I've read most recently, but I just had my entire staff read this book. And it's about taking the bureaucracy out of the organization and putting it on the people. How do you reorganize big companies to actually understand how to get them to operate as small teams, high-performing teams? So it really is a good book. We did it right before we went through our strategy exercise for the year. And I can tell you we had different outcomes of that strategy exercise because of this. How people led their teams and how they expected what their teams to do. So in conclusion, really it's all about, the IV principles or 4 principles, whatever you want to call them. Keeping it simple, design it, make it, sell it, teach it. Find your competitive advantage. Find your competitive advantage in these 4 principles, but find it in your support areas. Find your why, what wakes you up in the morning, whatever it comes from, it has to be resolute. And you have to understand that that's what's going to drive you 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. And then finally, I've almost lost my voice. I got 3 minutes left. Finally, the purpose and passion, you need both. If you don't have both, the why, will push you, but the purpose and passion will get you to the finish line. So that's it. So that's your lunchtime entertainment.